name is Andrea Richardson, and welcome to Fresh Perspectives in Social Work Podcast. Today, we're following up on our second discussion on what is organizational development. And in our last episode, we talked about organizational development as a way to support not only organizations so they can improve how they function, but also the environment in which people work and lead, but also the individual level of this approach to the work and social services can not only impact how we view, but actually do our work, but also how we work with children and families and how they can experience that. Today, I'm joined again with Jennifer Kerr, Director of the Organizational Effectiveness Department at the American Public Human Services Association, otherwise known as APHSA, and Megan Clough, Senior Consultant focused on organizational development with BerryDunn, a consulting firm focused on supporting human services. So welcome, everyone. Welcome back.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having us again.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So of course, I don't want to waste any time. I want to just dive right in. We had talked about, like we said, what organizational effectiveness is, what that readiness to change looks like, and kind of things to think about. So now we're kind of move from theory, to reality. Some good examples that people can kind of really sort of resonate with, on top of the ones that we already talked about at last episode. So how do we take the concepts of organizational development and put them into everyday practice? How does that shift happen? Megan, you want to go?
So you're always asking these great questions. So so how do we put them into practice? So I think the first thing that I would say is, when someone in an organization, and it will typically be someone who notices some type of issue or problem, when someone approaches us about an organizational challenge that they're trying to address, one of the first things we need to do is practically make sure that we absolutely understand it. Mm-hmm. And so listening, and Jennifer had said this in the last one, listening, doing our research is one very, very, very important practical step. Mm-hmm. If we get this wrong from the start, then you can risk not making any progress, or even worse, setting it backwards and not gaining traction. So I think a first practical step is to take the time, give yourself permission to take the time to really understand the information that you need to before jumping in. As might be usual in any other field, we all have kind of creative ideas and we want to jump to solution immediately. And in this field, we would arguably say that because in organizations, everything is intertwined like a spider web and interconnected, it is really important to take the time to understand what the issue is and what the navigational paths are, what the structure is, and what that web looks like. Mm-hmm. And so, as well as people's thoughts and ideas and leadership's perspective on things. So that's one very practical strategy. And then I would say two more things. Next is to diagnose the issue in a way that then you are able to say, here's what we understand the circumstance and issue to be. Let's validate that. Mm-hmm. And then practically, let's talk through a series of actions and behaviors that you can take now and the benefits and limitations of each one of those. Mm-hmm. I know that still sounds very high level, and I fundamentally believe, and I think Jennifer does too, that there are always more than one strategy to move forward, always. And strategies can impact who's involved. They can impact pace. They can impact capacity, interest, so many things. And so to really outline a variety. And then the final thing I like to do, because I've heard people say, oh, organizational change always takes 8 to 10 years. Okay, Jennifer and I are here to say to you, no, 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 and no. You do not have to plan on a marathon event to impact and address and make meaningful progress in social change. And there are ways, very practical ways, to help accelerate and still pace it well. So another practical strategy that I really like to do is recommend strategies where the strategy itself serves multiple of the purposes you're trying to achieve. In other words, you can either choose to do 15 practices addressed at 15 circumstances, or you can find the two that actually address 12 of those in very meaningful ways.
Right.
And that will make sure that people are actually, they look back at you and say, I'm willing to imbibe that. I'm good. We can handle that. So I think that I recognize that that's more about the framing of making decisions on what the actions might be. And I still consider those three things critically important to the pragmatic application of theory to practice. So that's where I'll stop. Now, I know Jennifer's going to be able to say, let me take it from there because.
Let me take it from there. So the first piece just to kind of share for me is start small. Change doesn't have to be this organizational wide thing, this system wide thing. It could be looking at, we have a staff member who's now going to be on medical leave for 3 months. How are we going to manage that workflow, within our team? So start small. Don't make it so over cumbersome or over powerful, within this, what you're doing. And then the other thing I want to share that really lends nicely into everything that Megan just shared is that one of the things that we utilize at APHSA is we utilize a resource referred to as the Human Services Value Curve. And that value curve really is a lens that we use to help us look at things from the point of view of the consumer. So not looking at things from an organizational point of view, a leadership point of view, but from the point of view of those impacted. And so that value curve really allows us to look at things kind of in 4 progressive lenses. And so regulative, so what are the foundational needs or things that need to happen? Collaboratively, who do we work with? How do we get work done? What does that look like? Integrative. And so understanding why, and Megan shared a lot about this, is we don't need those 15 different strategies if we know the 2 root causes that help support, or the why for all of that. And most likely it's probably communication is one of those 2 kind of top strategies in all organizations, or the understanding of the why. And then generative, looking at it from bigger than the organization, bigger than the community, and understanding all of those pieces pulled together is just kind of my examples that I use.
Yeah. And it's funny because like the things that you talk about, I always think of like, okay, like what are the quick wins? What are those things that like I had worked with someone at one point and they would say like what can I do by next Tuesday? Right? To keep it small, keep it a quick win to kind of get that ball rolling and get that change going in a really positive way. And then, the whole adage of working smarter, not harder, right? We don't have to solve, 50 different things all at once when I can do 2 things that might, solve 20, kind of thing. So, so really kind of taking a step back and kind of looking at those things and kind of comparing and kind of thinking about them so that then you're doing it in a really targeted way that will make sense and kind of also help build that buy-in within your organization or with others that you're working with to kind of get that going in the right direction. So if I'm doing, if I'm a, person in an organization and I'm thinking about it at an individual level, this type of organizational development or effectiveness work, what, we kind of think about sort of the concept of having, certain conversations with folks, and I'm working with families and I'm doing my practice in a certain way. what would be sort of your thoughts on what that might look like, kind of concepts or tools that, might be good examples around that type of change?
So if I'm understanding the question correctly,
Yeah.
it's what are some principles for the day-to-day conversations and approach for motivating and continuing this change? Am I I just want to make sure. Okay.
You're doing fine. Yeah.
All right. Phew. Whew. Okay. So there's two, from my perspective, there's two things. And then I just want to build on something that both Jennifer and I highlighted in the first podcast, which was really that very active listening and listening to understand rather than to just, progress an agenda. And so I think starting with that as a basis and another basis being inclusive, kind of egalitarian listening. Everybody has a voice. And when we're thinking about organizational changes, everybody's voice needs to be heard. And people really need to have that, the even amount of kind of listening time. Now, that does not mean 15 minutes for you and 15 minutes for you. It means people being able to really share it. So within that, then, I have two particular favorites around what are frameworks for having those conversations. One, I'm a big believer in crucial conversations. I realize I'm advertising right now. It's not advertising for me. It's advertising for an approach and a concept. It is life-changing personally and professionally. So be prepared. And you can get trained in it easily, or you can, read a book and become familiar with it as well. Crucial Conversations focuses on a collaborative, outcomes-based approach to collectively solving decisions, where even when we do that, even when the stakes are high, of course, that never happens in our agencies, right? And when there are opposing opinions, and when it's likely that there are going to be some high emotions, right? So Crucial Conversations really is a very solid approach to how do we have conversations. And the sneak preview on that is focus on facts, acknowledge that those facts, we translate those into stories that have meaning for us, and acknowledge the stories. And then open with curiosity to make sure that you truly understand. So fact, story, curiosity. And the second, I would say, I'm a certified Dare to Lead facilitator, and I'm talking to a social, group of social work audiences. So I am imagining most people here are aware of Dr. Brené Brown's research on leadership and courage and vulnerability. And very quickly, her research has demonstrated that there are a set of actions that we can take every day that are daring leadership actions. And there are a set of actions that are self-protective leadership actions, which, by the way, when change occurs, again, it's uncertainty promotes a sense of fear, and fear can promote self-protection. It's a very natural step. It's not something that anybody necessarily is doing intentionally. The good news is that we can recognize what is self-protective versus what is daring, and we can choose. And I'll give you one brief example. When we're faced with something, we can focus on getting it right, really understanding it versus needing to be right. And that's a difference, right? Yes. Getting it right is a daring behavior. Being right or needing to be right is more of a self-protective behavior.
So Megan, I think what you're saying is, so there's no more of those conversations where, we're just waiting for the other person to stop talking so that I can put in my point, and kind of be right, that's gone. We have to change how we're thinking about those conversations that we're having.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Jen?
Yeah. And I think, so when I'm thinking about crucial conversations or having those conversations, at a practice level, at an individual level. The thing I'd add to what Megan said is always starting with creating a space of safety. And so whether that is as an organizational development professional in kind of a work session, or as a social worker when working with a family, to get that buy-in, to have those honest or fact-leading crucial conversations, you have to start with creating a safe space for those that you are working with. And then the other piece for me is just, I guess, two pieces. So recognizing that in an organization, it is supervisors and managers that drive change. It is not the directors that drive change. It's the culture supporters, which is kind of that middle line or middle frame within an organization. And then continuously as an individual, when I'm trying to better understand a practice, a change, as well as I can't stress enough the importance of understanding the why.
Yes.
In everything that you're doing, is that something that's wrong or needs to be changed? Or why, understanding why people or staff are doing what they're doing, understanding why they think this is a positive response or approach to something. And so always key and critical in everything that I do.
I feel like understanding the why, Jen, needs to be like in a sign or poster, like
that's my motto. Like in the back,
Yeah,
I want to have understand the why in everything that I do.
Absolutely.
I'm having t-shirts made. I'm having t-shirts.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I would imagine that from that safety perspective that you're talking, that culture of safety within an organization, it really has to be something that is demonstrated, right? Over and over. You can't just say it, that this is a safe space. It has to be things that people can see and so that they trust it, right?
Yes. I can't ever say kind of, from my experience, not only as organizational development, but in my experience in a human services agency as well, is we can't ask our staff to create a space or culture for families that we work with that we're not creating for our own staff internally. And so that modeling, that building that capacity, again, is happening from the how and not always the what.
Right. So if I'm hearing you correctly, Jen, if I'm experiencing this type of safety culture within my agency, that almost then translates out to the families that I work with, because it's kind of that natural progression of, how that change is experienced and then put out into the field. So, I thought it was interesting how you were talking about how that middle group of supervisors, managers are really important to when it comes to that, development within an agency and those positive changes that might be happening. What would you say is sort of like, their biggest tool that they can use to kind of help facilitate change when they're working with, with their teams?
So I would build on both the prior question as well as the question you just asked, because I think there's two things there. When we were talking about creating a safe space, I would recommend and add a brave space, because there are some dynamics, for people, for all of us, where we may not ever feel entirely safe, where on the flip side, we may feel safer when we know it's a brave space. And that actually then goes to your question, Andrea, about, well, what can our managers do? So one thing is that our managers and supervisors, we can take a moment just to describe the difference. So managers will typically be overseeing a department that includes people. There also might be handling the strategic plan for the department, the direction of the department, the budget for the department. And that's really important because they have a higher level of scope and responsibility than perhaps supervisors. Supervisors oversee the daily operations of a team of people. And both are absolutely pivotal, right? So depending, again, whether you're one or the other, this next piece. So I think they have the toughest role in the organization. I think Jennifer probably agrees. They have to be looking up. And when I say looking up, I'm using the hierarchical notion of an organizational structure, which is not the organizational structure that all of us are in. And I would say they have to be looking toward their leadership to understand the direction. And then they also have to be constantly looking around with their teams to understand where are we relative to that set of objectives. And then constantly be thinking about, all right, where is, if there is, a gap? Where is there a gap? And how can we broach that gap? So observation is one, reading the cues every day, and then conversation is the other. Really taking the time to have conversations. Now, in our agencies, it's not unusual that our supervisors and managers will be promoted from within. And so they may have started within an individual operational role, critically important, and then they may be promoted to overseeing a team. And so I think the major step that needs to happen there is a focus that shifts away from individual, yourself, and your own performance to the team's performance. In other words, as we look at measuring the success of managers should be able to be very clear that their success will be determined really on how are they leading their teams. And that's a big shift. That's a really big shift. And that shift, though, that directional clarity allows managers to say, I'm going to give myself permission to have a regular coaching routine with my team members. Because it's important. And I'm the liaison between organizational direction and my team's ability to accomplish that in their day-to-day work. So those are the things that, that I would say is constantly making sure that you're aligned as a manager to the organizational direction, understand the authority and the scope of responsibility that you have, and give yourself permission to focus on permission and accountability to really focus on the experience, the performance, and the development of your team every day. That's your job, your experience, performance, and development of your team.
Yes, absolutely, Megan. And kind of building off of those things, when you're looking at the experience, the development, the performance of your team, one of the things that I use a lot is Amy Edmondson's Safety and Accountability Matrix that really looks at the work. I use it, I should say, to look at the work of individuals that make up a team within an organization, kind of from performance standard or accountability. So there's that low performance, high performance, or high accountability, and then low safety or high safety. And so really understanding, are your team members, are they what's considered as part of the apathy zone? So they're kind of showing up, going through the motions, but, kind of tuned out to the work that's happening, and really choose self-protection over exertion in a lot of the work that they do. And are they high performing, but still low safety? And are they anxious? Is your team members, or are your team members anxious? They aren't, maybe from past cultures. We talked in an earlier episode around what is the history, of change and culture within an organization. But because of those, it's real. Do people not believe in change? Do they not believe in false starts? Do they not want to share ideas, try new things, ask for help because of that high level of anxiety? Or is your environment or your team more of a safe or considered safe one? So, but there might still be some low accountability. So I'm highly psychologically safe, yet I'm creating a team of low accountability because my staff now are comfortable. They're doing a great job. But they don't feel challenged. and your teams don't make kind of full strides in the work that you're doing? Or are you creating a team as a supervisor and as a manager that what is considered as part of the learning zone? So it is high accountability. So again, back to what we talked about earlier with those crucial conversations, there's facts, there's honesty that are kind of leading it, but you're also creating a space of safety. Your team wants to collaborate. They want to and believe in learning from each other and getting the work done, and they are full of innovation. So that's just kind of the framework I use a lot when I'm thinking about change or supporting a team, coaching a team from that, full team perspective.
I feel like at the top, so at that leadership level, if we're thinking about, we've talked about sort of that team level, that supervisor level, and then the individual level at the top, they're sort of setting the tone, as we say, like they're setting the tone for, what they'd like to have happen, but that at each of these other levels, this work that's happening that's kind of making that kind of come to reality. But I really look at those leaders, as much as they are sort of the visionary folks, they are in service to the people that, that are within their organization. So how does that, that aspect of serving, the people that are in your organization, how is that sort of work at that leadership level?
So I love that connection. And I also just want to say, it is funny to think about with this podcast that vigorous head shaking, like head nodding, like in agreement with everything's being said is not going to be captured. So we're just verbalizing it here. So I think you had mentioned that the leaders are in service to the team members within the agency. And I think what Jennifer and I would also say is that the leaders are in service to the mission, vision, and values of the organization. That's which I know you're saying too, Andrea. So the reason that I think we would distinguish it slightly is that an organizational development practice, one that is incredibly effective and that also it occurs in every one of the organizations that practice what I had mentioned in our first episode, the chain reaction of excellence, the organizations that are considered repeatedly to be world-class organizations. And that is that they recognize that they are not the first set of leaders that have been in this organization. They will not be the last. And they are essentially in service to continuing the practices and legacy. And they create a very tangible set of tools that can outlast and live them in the organization while maintaining stability and direction. And those include the service promise, and that's the promise that you make to, an agency makes to its service recipients every day. What's the promise? And it's usually captured in a phrase, and a set of operational service values. And these service values are literally able to be operationalized. So these are not the values that we might see on some organization sites that we could literally pull 20 organizations and see the same values. These are not those, right? These are a set typically outlined in order where literally managers and leadership and employees, they use those operational values every day to direct their choices and to plan for organizational change. So, for instance, I worked with an organization with a university where when the pandemic started and their values, their first value focused on respect and care. And then their second was integrity and equity and responsiveness. And so when they realized that there were some real mental health challenges that were occurring among their team members, employees, as well as students, although most of the students had gone home, they essentially said, we're going to live even more into our values during the pandemic. What's it look like in the pandemic? We've never done one of these pandemic things. How do we live these values during the pandemic? Because what we do know is that our organization is fundamentally, non-negotiably focused on these values. And so that is one of the ways that leaders can really say, how do we lead? Well, we lead with a service promise and service values. We lead by an accountability to those every day. And we lead by a clarity of what those are every day. And by the way, they should outlast. They should stick with the organization for a long time. And if you notice that one is missing, like really missing, respond. There was an organization, a very famous organization, that during the pandemic realized through feedback that they had never prioritized equity as an operational value. And they added it, even though this was an organization that was started in the 1950s and had never needed to update their operational values since then. They added equity. And they have now worked that into operationalizing it every day. So those are the things that I really say. And Jennifer, your thoughts?
Yeah. And so in addition, I guess, Megan, into those things that you were sharing, I think the thing for me, for leaders, or when thinking about service culture, within an organization, is really around being community-centered and staff-centered, and all of the work. Encourage staff, encourage community members, service participants to be at the table from the beginning. And demonstrating that, understanding, then helping you as a leader to understand the perspective, the value that staff bring, and staff see that. Community members, stakeholders, families see that, the importance of those pieces. And then I guess the other piece, Megan, and tying in what you were saying, is the values piece. And so one of the things I know, I'm going to talk about it, I think, a little bit more in next steps, but is incorporating behavioral-based interviewing. From the very beginning, when you're thinking about supports, workforce, all of that. So really being able to understand your staff, the experiences that they come from, and so on.
Yeah, and I think, Jen, one of the things that that you brought up that I think is really powerful is that aspect of having even families or people who are receiving your services who have that lived experience at the table. Sometimes that, from an organizational standpoint, can be, might feel a little risky, right? Because, maybe what they're going to say is not rosy. Maybe they're going to bring up some issues, but the powerful experience from that can really be quite remarkable when you allow those discussions to happen, you allow people to be heard, and then together you kind of come up with a solution, which is really, anytime that those happens, it's really like the demeanor that you see of the people who are at the table is quite different, right? Like, people smile, they're excited, they feel like they're doing the work that they have always wanted to do. And so it's very powerful to sort of allow or be open to those types of interactions and changes.
Yeah. And the one thing, Andrea, that I would add to that too, is when you are driving change, supporting organizational change through people with lived experience, through staff, that you're not just including staff or people with lived experience that have had positive experiences within your organization or within the topic as well, because you're going to learn more from those that were challenged through a previous program approach, than you are from people that it went well with.
Right. So I think I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up the whole aspect of recruitment and retention, especially when we're thinking about any of the human services work. We know that that's, a consistent struggle to sort of recruit for talent and retain them over time and all of the issues that kind of go along with that. But when we're thinking about organizational development and effectiveness, what are some of the ways that we can engage and recruit to build sustainable options to support the new direction of the agency? Because the people who you bring in, you're going through this change. You want to make sure you have people in here who could continue that work, have kind of that value system, and kind of fit in with the direction of the agency. What are some thoughts that you have on that?
Well, I think you've somewhat, at least from my perspective, answered the question a little bit, and I asked it, which is super, right? So, because Jen and I don't really have to work very hard on this one. So what I mean is that the service, promise, and values, when that is really clear and co-created, and I really like what Jennifer and you had both said, co-created by service recipients, right? Those people with lived experience in the community that, you are working to collectively serve. When you have identified and kind of validated, clarified what the service promise and service values are, then you translate that into the questions that you ask, into how you write your job descriptions, how you post your job descriptions, where you post your job descriptions, right? So and I don't want to steal thunder, so I'm going to stop talking because Jennifer gave a little bit of a preview prior to you asking the question. So I'm going to stop talking, Jennifer.
So two things. And so before we even got to the behavioral-based interview, for me, it's also starting with a realistic job preview video that is up to date. And I say that, recognizing that that is only one component. And I smile, and if you could see me nodding right now. So my oldest child is 19, or will be 19 in the next few weeks. And when she was first born, she was utilized as a cast member in a realistic job preview video. So in Pennsylvania, in child welfare, we were utilizing realistic job preview videos for the past 19 years. But so recognizing, while that is important, it is only one piece of kind of workforce, recruitment, retention. And so setting those expectations, having a practice model, so those coming in understand the values and supports, and then the behavioral-based interviewing. So again, I keep saying, not understanding the what, but the why and the impact something has. And then finally, is that once staff are there, continue with maintaining that culture of professional development and growth within an organization.
Sure.
If I could briefly reiterate something that Jennifer just started to connect on by virtue of the continue to reiterate it, I think both she and I would also say be very intentional about your onboarding. Recruiting in and of itself takes a lot of time, effort, and frankly, a lot of money as well, right? So what we don't want to do is spend that time, effort, and energy, hire someone, and then for whatever reason, lose them within the first bit of time, even though they align with our values, et cetera. So, what people are looking for is, listen, they told me this story about the organization. Is that what I'm going to experience or not? So really make sure that your culture and your onboarding reflect either the journey that you're on to get to that culture, right? So that it's an honest explanation, and also that you're very intentional and thoughtful around creating an onboarding that not only provides information that's necessary, it intentionally develops the relationships that are necessary, because relationships become the glue that really starts to solidify I can be a part of this.
Mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm.
there's both the recruiting as well as the onboarding.
Yeah, and I would imagine that with that, that type of approach would also give a prospective employee sort of that idea of what is the agency like? What is that culture like? Can I see myself there?
Yeah.
Can I see myself fitting in? Jenna, I'm sorry, did you have something?
No,
else?
I just had one more thing to say again.
Yeah.
As Megan and I are talking about that culture of professional development and growth, it takes me exactly back to in the previous episode, the question that we started it with is, what is organizational development and organizational effectiveness? And what Megan and I shared is that culture within an organization of supporting the whole worker. And so again, it's more than training. It's more than consulting and technical assistance. It's more than coaching. It's more than transfer of learning. It is pulling all of that together to kind of continue that professional growth of staff.
Well, that was first of all, I just want to honor, that was the most beautiful reconnect back to the original question that I could ever have fathomed, right? So first of all, amazing. And then the other final point is the chain reaction of excellence that I've mentioned, that world-class organizations, they do what Jennifer just described. Their focus first is on that service promise, and that service promise is for when I say their customers or service recipients, it's their employees. We are all, as employees in the agencies, we are service recipients of the agency as well. And so are those that we serve. So world-class organizations focus first on their service promise, being clear around that, aiming it toward their employees. And then their employees who've had that modeled and delivered an experience for them are able, as Jennifer had said earlier, to really convey that to service recipients. And that's really what creates kind of this ongoing momentum of optimal performance. So, that connectivity of the employee care cannot be emphasized enough. And it's intuitively not where most organizations, unfortunately, go and really need to go. So
no, that's a really good point. I know that we have, for anyone who's listening here, that they're like, there's so many resources that you both have talked about. So I want to acknowledge that what we're going to do is we're going to put links to those resources in the description of the podcast. So you'll get all of those resources, as well as contact information for Jen and for Megan. But I also wanted to give you guys, if you had one final nugget of, brilliance to kind of help people understand and kind of move in this direction, what would it be? And also, I want to kind of give that plug to also Jennifer, because I know APHSA has a great e-learning that's coming, right?
Yes. So we are super excited that in a few weeks we are launching our learning management system, Thrive. So a training hub for resources, innovation, and virtual exchange among human services professionals. And so that hub will have lots of resources, asynchronous and synchronous opportunities to connect, again, around equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging, around leadership development, about how to have crucial conversations, is one of those areas as well. So I encourage you to check that out. And my two pieces I've already shared, but I will share them one more time, is that culture eats strategy, and as a leader, step back so others can step up.
Wonderful. Megan?
I just love that. First of all, very, very excited about the Thrive Learning Center and just how much you have described is there. I cannot wait to get in. And so thank you for reiterating and sharing that. And then I think recognize that we do right? We do have what it takes. We have the power and the influence and the tenacity and the care and the purpose to socially construct, maintain our cultures. That's important to know. These are not created externally to us. The actions and behaviors and mindsets that we bring to work every day, they translate to habits, and those habits become our identity. And the identity really reflects our character. So really, if we take it back, it really narrows down to what do we believe in, where, and are we operationally and directionally focused on that every day in how we do our work. So, and when we're not, or when we want to be even better at it, how can we utilize our care with a set of organizational tools and resources to improve that? And that's really, I mean, that's really what, it's a fancy concept, a fancy word. And at the end of the day, or set of words, really 2 words, at the end of the day, it translates to motivated individuals wanting to make sure that they're optimizing the performance of their organization and their teams every day, choosing a set of actions and behaviors that help them live and operationalize the values. And I think for the benefit, the incredibly important benefit of all the service recipients of that organization, including and not limited to the employees and the people they serve. So just so grateful that this, that we're able to share all of this with this group. And thank you for hosting this, Andrea.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the last nuggets of brilliance that you guys both have. It's just, I really can't thank you guys enough. So I would like to sincerely thank both Jennifer Kerr and Megan Clough for giving us their time and expertise. As you may have guessed, organizational improvements cannot be done just at the top, nor can it be done at the bottom. What we've learned from Jennifer and Megan is that it requires a collective approach of all levels. And in the case of social services, it means engaging people with lived experience in order to make changes that will truly have an impact on how services are designed and provided, as well as how communities can partner to sustain the changes that they have been made. The benefits, when you talk to the people who have implemented this type of concept, can be remarkable, from less people leaving for other jobs, to communities becoming active partners, to families working together to support their loved ones instead of being in formalized services. All outcomes are possible with the right mix of leadership, engagement, and commitment to the process. If you'd like to find out more about organizational development and how it can help you, your agency, or your community, please check out Jennifer and Megan's contact information in the description of this episode, and additional resources that we discussed are also there. Thank you and take care.